talk about a subject that some of you may have heard about, but maybe some of you have not. So let me start by asking you this question. When you find yourself in a storm, when you find yourself in a hurricane or a cyclone or any kind of a crisis, the truth is that every crisis demands heroic leadership. The question is, where is the map? And when something unprecedented, something crazy like COVID, a pandemic happens, we're all leaders. We know that we have to step up and demonstrate our leadership, but many of us don't know if there is a map, and we are trying to figure it out, which is the reason why there is so much uncertainty and there's so much worry, there is so much anxiety right now in all sectors of society. What if I told you that there is a map? And the map is called the heroic journey. And this is actually a map that has been around for a very, 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 very long time. In fact, almost as long as human beings have been around. But this map, the heroic journey map, which I'm going to share with you, was actually discovered and made popular by a gentleman called Mr. Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell wrote a book many years ago, maybe 50 years ago now, which is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So let me tell you a little bit about Joseph Campbell. He is the world's most famous and highly regarded mythologist. So in a way, he is like Devdutt Patnaik's Pardada, okay, at a global level in terms of mythology. Now, when Joseph Campbell studied the mythology of the entire world, all the cultures of the world, what he realized to his astonishment is that all the mythologies have a common structure and have a common framework or have a common map. And that map he called the heroic journey, and he wrote about it in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So since I know, Manish, you run a book club for your group as well as for others, this may be a book worth considering. And if people are not up to reading this kind of a book, it's an amazing book. You can also see two videos that you may like to see of Joseph Campbell. One is called The Power of Myth, and the other is called Finding Joe. So those of you who are interested, you may want to have a look at these videos. So what I want to do now is, before I share the map with you, I would like you to tell you three stories one by one. Okay? These are stories of people I think all of you know. And as you hear the story, I'm going to share it in a very quick way. I want you to think about potentially who is this person. I'm not going to reveal the name of the person in the story. Okay, I want you to think about who that person is. And if you want, you can put it into the chat box whenever you think you get the name. But this is not a contest. The purpose of this is not for you to only guess. The purpose of this is to actually have you hear the story, because each of these three stories carries the same pattern. And what I want to then explain is the pattern. So let me begin. This little boy was raised by adoptive parents. He drops out of college and he floats for a few years. He co-founds a tech company with a friend. After many failed attempts, he comes up with a breakthrough product that becomes very successful. In a dramatic power struggle, he is thrown out of his own company. This is a big clue. And suffers severe depression. His startup creates a sizable new category and is acquired by his old company. He returns as the CEO. He revives its sinking fortunes, and he pioneers two more categories. He dies of cancer, pancreatic cancer, after becoming a folk hero. So let me see how many of, yes. So all of you got it. Steve Jobs. So that's Steve. Okay, so this is story number one. Now, as you heard the story, and I'm telling you the second story, see if you can recognize a pattern in the story. Okay, so let me tell you the second story. This little boy was born in a poor tribal family. He studies law and he becomes a political firebrand. He is repeatedly arrested for sedition and for promoting violent revolution. He is sentenced to life imprisonment and he serves 27 years, during which time his philosophy and approach completely changes. After his release, he negotiates independence and a largely peaceful transition for his country. He is elected as its first president. He is awarded the Nobel Prize and becomes a world icon. So I'm sure many of you have guessed who this is.
Mandela.
Exactly. So this is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela before, when he was a boxer and a very militant, strong firebrand kind of a guy, and then how he changed his approach and philosophy when he was in prison on Robben Island. Again, just think about the pattern that may be common that you are learning through these two stories. Now I'm going to tell you a third story, and again see if you can recognize this pattern. This is a young farmer boy in a very remote area. He is raised by adoptive parents who are brutally murdered. He becomes a pivotal figure in the rebellion against an evil empire. His constant dilemma is to choose between good and evil. He has to choose between good and evil, and he's equally drawn to both. He trains under various masters and acquires diverse and loyal allies while overcoming many challenges. He finally confronts his nemesis, his arch enemy, who turns out to be his real father. Any guesses on this one?
Luke Skywalker?
Yes. Was that Aman?
That's Aditya.
Sorry, Aditya.
Aditya.
Yep.
Yes. So I've given you two historical figures and I've also given you a fictional character. And now I want to talk to you about the pattern. Okay, this is the pattern that Joseph Campbell identified as the common pattern between the heroic stories of all the cultures of the world, whether it's the Indian culture, the Chinese culture, the Egyptian culture, the Roman, Greek, you name it. All of those mythologies, all the hero stories follow the same pattern. So let me tell you what that is. Basically, he said that the heroic journey happens in 5 stages. Stage 1, and this is why it's relevant for us at this particular time. Stage 1 is that there is a crisis. And what the crisis does is that the crisis shakes you out of normalcy. Whatever was the accepted thing in the past, the crisis comes and completely shakes it out. The second stage is called trauma. You don't know how to deal with this crisis. You feel trauma, you feel uncertain, you feel scared, you feel anxious, you feel worried, all the things that perhaps some of us are feeling now. And what this does is that you have to now come to grips with an unfamiliar world. Okay, so Steve Jobs had to come to grips with being tossed out of his own company and getting back to being a small startup again. Nelson Mandela had to come to grips with his world of militant revolution and find himself for 27 years in prison, and so on. The third stage, this is a very important stage, is that you have to face your worst fear, or what in psychology that Astha will know is called the shadow. So this is about Luke Skywalker confronting Darth Vader, who is his father, and also his shadow, who represents the dark side of the Force. The fourth stage is after confronting the shadow, then there is a stage of growth. And in this stage of growth, you discover your greatness and you develop new capacities that you did not have before. This is where you really upskill and really transform your abilities to deal with a completely different situation. And the fifth and final stage is called the healing stage. This is the stage where you take all that you have learned, the elixir, or as in India, we would call the Amrit, and we take that Amrit to the rest of society and we bring about a transformation in that society. Okay. Now, when Joseph Campbell actually wrote his book, and if you go into it, he talks about 17 stages. And some people have simplified that to 12 stages. But as far as I'm concerned, from a leadership standpoint or from an organizational standpoint, these are the 5 critical stages that Joseph Campbell describes. So the first thing that I would like you to do is I would like to give you all of you a 1-minute silent reflection where I want you to think of any significant adversity that you have personally faced. It could be a health adversity, it could be a professional adversity, it could be a family adversity, it could be a business adversity, it could be a social adversity, something significant that you have faced and come out of successfully. And in that 1 minute, I want you to think about whether or not your path also broadly followed these stages. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and just allow you to reflect on a significant adversity in your life. Okay, and any insights that you have, if you would like to type them into the chat box and you don't mind sharing it in the forum, that's fine. Those of you who want to keep it private, you're entirely free to do so. But I hope you were able to see that very often when we face adversities in our life, they tend to follow, our response to those adversities tend to follow this pattern of the 5 stages. Now, let me give you the COVID example, right? And if you now look at how society or how governments or how organizations or how communities or how families or how individuals or how leaders have to deal with the COVID crisis, I would say that right now we have been shaken out of our normalcy. We are slowly coming to grips with an unfamiliar world of a lockdown and of social distancing. But I don't think we have faced our worst fear and our shadow yet. I think that is still to come. And only when we are able to face that and deal with it and confront it, will we be able to get to stage 4 of developing the new capacities and discovering our greatness. And as we do so, those of us who do will be able to then take it out and say, here is the new model. Here is the new model for individuals. Here is the new model for business. Here is the new model for retail. Here is the new model for aviation. Here is the new model for any sector that you can think of. So if you look at the situation that we find ourselves right now in COVID, I would say, this is my evaluation, you may have a different point of view, is that we are probably somewhere between 2 and 3, coming to 3. So with that, let me move on and tell you the other very important thing that Joseph Campbell said, which I think is relevant for all of us as leaders, as founders, as entrepreneurs. He said that this heroic journey, there are 2 parallel journeys that are taking place at the same time. The first is the outer journey, which is what are we doing in the world? How are we serving the world? This is the journey of selfless service. So in this journey, the hero achieves some very difficult tasks. He overcomes obstacles, he or she. He or she heals relationships in the outer world. And what they do as heroes is to uplift society. So you can think about, say, Nelson Mandela or Steve Jobs or even Luke Skywalker doing all of this. This is the outer journey. But perhaps more important or as important is the inner journey. This is the journey of self-mastery. And in this journey, the focus is not on achieving tasks, it's on achieving growth And I link you back to Astha's earlier presentation where she talked about growth rather than goals. It's not about overcoming external obstacles. It's about overcoming our internal neurosis. It's overcoming our internal issues, demons, problems. It's not about healing outer relationships. That happens in the outer journey. But in the inner journey, we have to deal with our own internal challenges. And in the inner journey, the focus is on evolving ourselves as opposed to uplifting society. So Joseph Campbell made a very important discovery. He said there is a common map, there's a common path, there's a common process, and there are two parallel things that are going on. So as leaders, if you want to be a hero, then we have to pay attention to both of these journeys and work on both of these at the same time. Both are equally important. One without the other doesn't serve the purpose. Just selfless service without self-mastery doesn't work. Just self-mastery without selfless service also doesn't work. Now, in this context, let me give you my own journey and see how it fits and follows the pattern. So, in my case, I had a very successful corporate career. I was on this, absolute rock star trajectory in an advertising agency. I was only 40 years old. And suddenly I had colon cancer. That was my crisis. It shook my normalcy. It then threw me out of the corporate world in a way and threw me into the unfamiliar world of health and illness and wellness and stress and immunity and holistic and integrated approaches, all of those kinds of things. And I had to face my deepest fear, my deepest shadow, which is that what happens to my corporate identity? And I had to figure out that really, that life is greater than lifestyle. Life is far more important than lifestyle. And in a way, I had to deconstruct and reconstruct my own identity in order to be able to then come up with this approach, write the book. That is where the growth is. Our approach and our book is the elixir, the amrit from that adverse journey. And now my work is to share it with the world and help other people who are going through the same challenge. So for example, I now say things like this, which Lena read out in my profile, which is, it's not that I overcame cancer or I defeated cancer or I beat cancer. No, that's not true. Actually, what is true is that cancer healed me. It made me a better person than I was before. And it gave me my purpose to help reduce the suffering that cancer causes. So I just want you to see how, even in my personal life, this approach, the heroic journey map, has played out very clearly and very precisely. The last point I want to make before handing over for 5 minutes questions is simply this. Why wait for a crisis? Why can't we journey consciously? So if you were to take that heroic map and look at it from a conscious standpoint or from a progressive standpoint or from a proactive standpoint, then it would look like this. Instead of a crisis hitting you, you sense inwards, okay, is there an impulse to change, to move, to grow, to evolve? And if there is, then you anticipate that change. Instead of trauma, you let yourself dissolve. You throw away your old business model and you say, you know what, this is a new world. I need to figure out an entirely new business model. And basically what we are talking about here is allowing the old self to die, whether it's an individual self or whether it's an organizational self or whether it's a brand. Can we allow some of the old to die to create space for the new? The third is to engage that unrealized potential, that part of it that we have been neglecting, that part of it that we've been pushing away. Can we actually embrace it, just like you have to deal with the shadow in the heroic map? The fourth, from here, the process of evolution begins, where we are discovering new gifts and new capacities and new skills for us to grow from. And finally, there is resolution. So evolution, dissolution, evolution, and resolution. This is where we can actually become a role model or a transformative force in the world. So let me just summarize what I have said so far, that when we are in a crisis, leadership is critical. The heroic journey may be a map. So what happens is this, and this is my last message to you. Don't waste the crisis. Take the fork in the road. The only way out is through. We can't bypass this. We can't escape this. We can't deny this. We can't bury this. We have to go through it. And the people who go through first will be the leaders. And the heroic journey gives you a fair map of what you can expect on the way. Now, in a 25-minute session, I could only cover a little bit of the heroic journey. I normally do a 2-day workshop for CEOs on how to understand it and how to apply it in their organizations. Obviously, I can't do that in a short session, but I hope I've given you a little bit of a taste of what this heroic journey is all about. And so I'd like to end by using a line from the famous Star Wars Luke Skywalker, a series which says, "May the force be with you, and may the force take reciprocity to an entirely new level." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay.